Love is our true divine nature, and our heart serves as the intersection of the spiritual and physical, connecting our soul with our body as the conduit for anchoring our divinity onto the earth plane. Embodying our divinity is the key to our ascension and to manifesting our highest destiny in this life. The teachings of the heart are alchemy. Join spiritual mentor and channel Jennifer Spohr each week on a sacred journey to lift the veil to remembering your divinity and meet other beautiful souls who are living the path of the awakened heart. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I am just childlike, so excited to share with you our guest today, Baljit Rayat. She is a certified sexologist, authentic tantra practitioner, Akashic Records consultant, intuitive mentor, DJ, and producer. Baljit takes her clients on a journey to rediscover their purpose, gifts, and talents by connecting them back to their sexual power so they can express their true potential. She's able to bridge the connection to what is happening for someone sexually, literally with their genitals, and know how that relates to them on a soul level. By looking at patterns that no longer serve them, she works with them to unlock their deepest desire to create prosperity, peace, and embodiment. Welcome, Baljit. What an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. And for those who don't know, Baljit and I go way back. We've been connected for a few years. And the work that she does is just magical and amazing. And as I also read in her bio, she's a super talented DJ and producer as well. So I'm just really, really thrilled to have this conversation. So welcome.
Thank you.
So I'd love for you to share with us, because I know, from our connection that you've been DJing and producing and working with the Akashic Records for quite some time. And I'd love for you to share with us how you felt called to this other work that you're doing now.
Meaning the sexual work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I should have used a complete. The
Yes.
sexual work. Yes.
Yes. Well, before becoming a authentic tantra practitioner and certified sexologist, for many years, since like 2010, while working in the Akashic Records and having mentorship programs, I kept getting people that had blocks around their sexual energy, or they wanted to connect to their mission and their gifts and their talents. And when I would go into the records, somehow we'd end up talking about what was happening in the bedroom for them, what was happening for them not feeling safe in their body, and how that related to how they were showing up in their business and why they weren't connecting to their mission even, or even being able to feel safe to express themselves. So for quite some time, I had a program called Sex and Sensuality, so it helped women connect to their sensuality, but also heal stuff around their own sexuality. And then eventually, it kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I feel like I need something more tangible to really get people in their bodies. Like, there's one thing about, doing all the energy work and, working in the Akashic Records, but it's also about integration and how to like physically integrate that, especially when it comes to trauma, whether micro and macro around sex, and how, what are the things we were taught about sex, like through cultural programming, religious, societal, governmental, like all kinds of programming that really has impacted how we show up and how we function physically, sexually, but also how it impacts us with our mission and our purpose, our gifts. So that's when I was like, okay, I need to, do this. And so that's how I got into studying and becoming an authentic Tantra practitioner. And it's been like a game changer because there's so much application around meditation and somatic practices that really get you in your body, and really like literally working with the genitals in the most sacred, harmonious way. And then I started to see such a massive shift, even more so with working with clients, with bridging the Akashic records with the somatic practices as well. So that's how I got into it. It just was like, it was so needed. And, talking about sex or even sexual energy can be a very daunting subject for some, and even embarrassing. Or I've dealt with so many where they just have been afraid to talk about, if they've never had an orgasm, or they do so well in business ish, but there's still something going on with their partnership that's not lining up. And so we want to look at where are the incongruencies that are happening sexually and how that matches up with your mission.
So beautifully stated. And as I'm listening to you speak, what keeps coming forward very strongly is that programming around separation consciousness as a whole, right? Because there isn't any one part of us that is separate for another, whether it's, our sexual nature, our genitals, our body, our business. Before we hit record, I was sharing with you, right, how I've been taking these voice lessons the last few months, and just the magic of opening up the throat chakra and the body in general, and the connection of your expression, and how that comes from the womb and up through, the throat. It's really truly fascinating and amazing at how tapping more into our sexual nature, our sensual nature, really opens us up to reconnecting with every aspect of our being. It's just so amazing.
Yeah, and just the similarities, like for those that are listening and don't know, like the larynx actually mimics, like it, there's such a parallel with our womb, with our uterus, vagina, and cervix as well. And so when we are able to heal these parts of our sexual reproductive, system and our sexual energy, the way that you're able to express yourself is a whole lot more connected. And that was such a big thing for me on, I thought I'd healed a lot around sexual energy, but then
Yeah.
when I studied authentic tantra, I was like, oh, there's a lot more here that I needed to look at. And I noticed that my voice changed in a way that I have been able to be more vocal around my communication with boundaries, and like just requesting things, and just, what my needs are, and just clarity of what I need to, share. And so I love that that you've taken up singing, and as we were talking before, it's like when you're disconnected from the womb, it's like you notice if you're singing, it's like there's more force coming out. But when you're just like connected to the womb, and then you're, moving that energy and connecting it through the heart and being able to express it, it's got so much power, and it almost feels effortless, like you're not having to force yourself as well to express.
That's so true. I've noticed that in singing as well. When I intentionally am singing and set the intention to open up my throat more, I also at the same time simultaneously set the intention to connect from the womb area as well, and it really does open things up so much more. Wow, we could have like a whole day summit or event about this topic. But to serve those who are listening for this conversation right now, to say, what are so many of us, right, have been programmed to live in problem solving mode, right? Like just to live from the space of reacting to whatever the latest fire is that comes forward for our healing, to put out. But for someone who's, even just wants to feels like things are going great right now, but it can be even more, right? Like, what are some signs that someone could look for that would help them to further open up to their sensual nature and to their body?
Mhm. Well, I loved how you started off with like people love to be in the problem solving mode because um, it can also be a state of like a trauma response of fight or flight, of always like having to solve problems as well. So there's a few things, and it really depends on the person themselves. Like, for anyone, I would check in and be like, do I actually have any trauma around sex, or have I been sexually violated? There have been many that I worked with that don't actually remember, but their body, like the trauma responses that they have, literally show up as like a sexual violation. And sometimes it legit is. And when we go into the Akashic records, they start to really see like, oh, I actually was sexually violated. And then they start to get their memory back, or and they start to connect the dots of like, oh, this is why I've been showing up this way for so long, is I was sexually violated way back then. So you want to look at repeating patterns, or just something that's just not like every time you try to work through it, it's just not like shifting. And then in regards to sexual energy and the topics around sex, it is so easy to avoid it, or think like, oh yeah, I have an okay sex life. And it's like, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how would you rate that? Like, how connected are you in receiving pleasure? And has to do with you receiving pleasure. Like, where are you at on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest? And so being super honest and be like, well, it's a 6. So it's like, okay, well, what would make it a 10? Like, what is it that you need to do to make it a 10? And it's okay if you don't have the answers in that moment, but just bringing awareness. You know,
Mhm.
the the biggest blocks that we even talk about through authentic tantra is the lack of awareness and lack of education, and lack of knowledge as well. And so when you don't have the knowledge, or even the awareness, or even education of like what's going on down there, then how would you know? Right. So there's a lot of people that are now in the sexual wellness industry that are now, sharing more information that is now bringing more awareness to others, like on Instagram, on YouTube. And it's like, oh, yeah, maybe I do need to look at this. Right. So it's awareness is one of the big thing, and it's so easy to not be aware. And if you're not aware, then it's because you're probably not in your body, or you're always in your head all the time, right?
Absolutely. I love what you said about, the reference just now about being in your head all the time, because when you were, giving the advice around the inner inquiry, right? Asking yourself the questions. Something that I believe is really important in that, right? Is not even like thinking about, when you're asking yourself the questions, but setting an intention to tune into your body, right?
Yeah.
And how does your body feel when you ask the question? Because a lot of times too, our head, or like our ego mind, might say, oh, I'm an 8 on a question, but our body's like, oh, no, 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 you're not you're like a 5 or something, right?
Yeah.
So important for us to feel into those questions for the
Yeah.
true, kind of gauge as to where we are.
Yeah. And again, like, this topic can be daunting because it does mean like, oh, like, how do I communicate that with myself and my relationship if I am in one? Like, what do I do now? Right? But that's the greatest gift. It's like you can start from somewhere, and it doesn't need to be daunting. It's one of the greatest gifts is to look at it. We may think it's like the scariest thing, but I can guarantee you, once you look at it and you just embrace, your genitals, or for women, like your womb, it's, I mean, that's where intuition, or deep level intuition, resides. So it's like, it just feels so important to listen to her.
Yeah, absolutely. And and even though, like, right, you know, people who identify as men are constructed a bit differently, but it still comes from pretty much the same space.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for you to share with us more about how you work with your clients. Like, do you work with individuals, couples, both groups?
All. Yeah,
All of
so
them, all of
I've
them.
done groups before. I'm actually completing a group program called the 5 Elements of Tantric Dance, and that's been a nice like movement practice. I do couples as well. I actually like to start off individually, especially if it's working with couples. It really depends where they're at on their journey. Um, but the people that I work with a lot are usually like one-on-one work. And how I usually begin with their journey with the container is I do assessment where, you know, I ask them a lot of questions. And this gives me an idea of like what's really going on. And just like these are in-depth questions, you know, around sexual history, and just it just really allows me to intuitively oversee, okay, what's the common thread here?
Mhm,
Then from there, we book an Akashic Record session to transmute some of those patterns that have really come forward to help that person understand, oh, like this is why this pattern keeps showing up, or this is why this keeps happening, you know, in my, for example, my ovaries, or I keep having cysts or whatever, or where does it come from as well. So really understanding the programming, or really understanding like an event that had happened to them years ago where they've been violated. Because before we even start doing the somatic practices, we need to kind of work with the energetic body. We have to work with the energy body, the emotional body, so that they can really have a sense of understanding. And then they're like, okay, then, depending on the person, we slowly go into the somatic practices where I'll teach them a form of vulva mapping, and then yoni mapping, and then a yoni massage. Uh, and it really depends on the person. For some, they're not fully ready for a yoni massage yet, but they're ready for the yoni or the vulva mapping. And so we really take it slow upon their readiness. We never want to force it, because we're also getting them to really understand if there's trauma, what the trauma responses are, and how that shows up in their body. And then from there, they start to really see the shifts. And one of the biggest shifts that I've seen with pretty much all of them is them actually getting in their body. So they're able to, like the byproduct of them is not even just having, you know, even better sex or just better pleasure and orgasmic exploration in their body, but it's also they're able to express themselves more, they're able to create more and feel confident, and you could see it in their skin, you can just see how they show up. Their voice, their presence even changes. So it's a pretty beautiful journey to co-create with someone with you know, and be able to witness and support them.
that's beautiful. Would you say, what would you say, well, I guess I'll ask the question first. Are there any common threads that you notice that are pretty, you know, that apply with pretty much every person that you work with?
Hmm. Yeah, that's such a good question, because everyone is so different. But the common thread I would say is like, um, is more of like not taking time to really connect with the womb,
Mm,
or for you know, people identifying as men to you know, really connecting with their genitals as well, but not creating space for it. um I've noticed, because the way societal programming, like how we've been raised, is to not connect with it, or we minimize that experience or treat it as a separate, call it like a separate side dish versus the main dish. So it's always like treated as like, oh, I'll deal with this later. I'll do this weekend, you know, like it's not kind of like this is priority, you know? And it's a common thing where it gets left behind when it needs to be kind of like the, you know, when you wake up in the morning, actually connecting down there and checking in and how you're feeling. Um, and there's also the common thread of physical sensation, whether it's numbness, irritation, or pain. Those are different levels of even trauma responses that can show up in the genitals. And so being able to bridge that and support people in understanding them, it helps them really understand of like, oh, this is why I'm having like erectile challenges, or
Yeah.
this is why I can't orgasm. And letting go of the shame. So the other common thread is shame. Guarantee like almost everyone that I worked with, there's been some level of shame.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, there's so much programming around that, right? How we're taught that it's something that needs to be concealed, that it's not appropriate, to discuss. And then, that combined with all of the inversion, right, of our bodies and what's advertised and just like what's out there in the world too. Yeah.
100%. 100%.
If there's, well, I've learned lots on my journey of ascension, but if there's one thing I've definitely learned, it's like just so much of what we've been programmed to believe. It's almost like the opposite of everything,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Right? It's like for all of what we've been taught, to have shame for our bodies and how they look and how they're unique. It's actually the opposite of that. There isn't one of us that it's the same, and our bodies are something to absolutely be celebrated, which I relate to so much of what you're sharing because it's been a journey, for me too, to learn how to love my body and embrace my body in what many ways, the ego aspect of me might view as, oh, you're not in your optimal shape, or, at your optimal weight, or like the ego is always, creating reasons for us to feel like we're falling short. But I believe the divine truth is that we're always perfect, right? Like in where we are in this now moment. So that's certainly a journey. And I know what you've shared today, so many can relate to.
Yeah. Thank you. Definitely
Yeah.
resonate.
Yeah. It's really beautiful. Um, I wanted to also ask you, I'm very curious about the vulva mapping.
Hmm.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so before I get my clients to actually go inside, it's actually connecting with the vulva. So just
Mhm.
really connecting to all the parts, like the outer labia, the inner labia, the mons pubis. And I usually show a diagram so that they know, where what's the inner labia, what's the outer labia, what's the vaginal introitus, what is that, where the pee hole is, because surprisingly there's a lot of women that don't actually know exactly what goes down here. And sometimes I even get them to put a mirror, so even do yoni gazing, so actually just like looking at their vulva. And like I've had women feel like they had like a reaction where they're like, "Oh, I think it's ugly because ever since I gave him birth, it just looks yellow." And I was like, "Wow, so this is how you look at your vulva. So do you see how this is how you look at yourself in general and how you show up in your body if you have this judgment?" And then it just gets them to like, "Oh," and also not shame themselves for it. It's just like being able to reframe
Yeah.
that. And for some people, they look at and they're like, wow, I was kind of surprised. I thought I'd be really judgmental, but I'm actually appreciative. Yeah. And then, um, and then I get them to really touch the different areas of the vulva, but to also, uh, really see if there's any numbness, if there's any irritation or pain, and then I guide them through that somatic practice of how to shift that, of how to really bring awareness to all the areas, and then eventually explore the clitoris as well. But we're exploring everything about the vulva. I mean, we've been so programmed to be very clitoral focused, like just focus on the clitoris, and that's just
Right.
many of us have been raised that way. But we have many beautiful areas to explore around the vulva, and our clitoral system actually exists our clitoral bulb exists like behind the inner and outer labia as well. So really understanding our erectile tissues, and um there's just so much wisdom behind it. So once we bring awareness to it, it's like, oh wow, like I really appreciate you. Especially for women who have had some damage near the perineum through birth, if they've been stitched up, or they had the vaginal opening ripped as well. Sometimes there can be numbness around that area, and they think that they're screwed for life and will never be able to experience an amazing orgasm again. But you can heal from that. There's ways of working with that to denumb, to de-armor. And so that's what you're doing. You're thawing yourself up to really enhance all the senses and bringing connection and intuitively connecting.
So interesting that I've not personally had a C-section, but I'm being intuitively guided right now. So there must be someone listening asking, to ask you, uh, how does all of what we're discussing here, like what you said about how after some women have given birth, like how how is someone who's had a C-section impacted?
Yeah. Um, so there can be a lot of trauma with C-sections. And like I've actually worked with women who have actually had like planned C-sections and they're fine. Um, but the thing is, like when you have a C-section, you're put under, the like you're numbed out as well, and you have
Yeah.
the baby being pulled out of you. So there's a lot of scar tissue, and there is trauma that does happen when that happens because you're not vaginally birthing through the canal.
Mhm.
And there is a chemical that gets released when you are, that the baby receives as well when they're being birthed vaginally. So when they're actually being taken out and having a C-section, um, I witness babies just kind of having more kind of like deficiencies or whatever because they haven't had that connection or the chemical that they needed through the vaginal canal, like actually going through the cervix and the vaginal canal. Uh, so so if you do I mean, if you've had a C-section or planning to have one, just like the aftercare is really important because and just birthing in general, because sometimes with women they just kind of get back at it and get back to work. But there's so much aftercare that is needed to tend to the womb and just see how she's feeling. And there might be some grief as well, like if you had a C-section, like I've talked to women who had grief that actually literally wanted to give vaginally and were not able to, and giving them space to grieve that. Or again, that not knowing what was going to happen even afterwards. There's been some trauma with that, of not feeling held and supported and getting the nourishment that they needed, um, and grieving through that as well. So the grief bit is big because I mean, we've been taught to really ignore our intuition of how our body can really function just through our womb as well, like really listening to our womb and how to birth, and being so dependent on the medical system. And the medical system is great when we need it, um, but again, it's like I've had people who've gotten so much trauma just from pap smears and just are like their cervix are completely numb because of that. And so, or having like forceps being put inside and just like having to just be okay, after having a baby. And it's like they're now having to breastfeed or they can't breastfeed because something else happens. So, um, really listen to your intuition if you are planning on having a baby, and really listening to the womb. Like, what does the womb need? I just feel it's really, really important.
Thank you for that. And now the faucet's turned on.
Of course
What
it.
the channel has turned
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
They're like, "Oh, ask about this." So now we're
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
this.
yeah.
What you mentioned about other traumatic experiences, right? Like having a pap smear, and then it can even be, an IUD, or having to terminate a pregnancy. There are so many different experiences that we have that can be traumatic, and I believe, just speaking as a collective, that we have a tendency to minimize those, right? Like it's all, oh, this IUD is just part of the, what I got to do, and all of that, and we minimize that.
It is a form of bypass. Like, it is a form of, I call it spiritual bypassing if you're not connected to your sexual energy, because
Yeah.
when you're literally just not listening to your body or your womb of like, what does she really need? And again, the same applies for, people identifying as male as well. Is it's like, what do the genitals need? How can you support them? This is like your creative life force. Um, and yes, abortions, and like, I mean, I've dealt with women who had them even when they were young, and they are now like feeling like, oh, they're like, oh, I haven't really dealt with it. And I feel a lot of guilt because I just was like up and go. I've had, women who've had more than one abortion, and that was just a thing that they did, and they didn't realize how traumatic it was for them. So again, bringing awareness for the grief or even miscarriages, and um, really understanding that it's so important.
Mhm. Yeah, important to acknowledge that, and also to um, nurture your body,
Yeah.
with the acknowledging those experiences too. Um, what would be so for someone who is listening to this conversation, and the light bulbs are coming on, right? It's like, wow, there's definitely opportunity for me to get more in touch,
Mhm.
with my body, and to just even do kind of a review, right? Of like all of the experiences that she's had, or he, right? What would you recommend as like a couple of daily practices, or way that someone could start establishing, more of a deeper, regular connection with their body?
Mhm. Well, definitely having like a journal, but getting into the body, and it could be like a breathwork practice, a somatic practice. It could be just like working out and dancing, like moving the body, and then just having the journal aside. For myself, like I work a lot with the yoni egg to kind of, when I do my yoni yoga practices, I'll just kind of like journal because I get so much aware, like wisdom that comes through, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm just like writing stuff down. So it's like, once we pay attention to it and we really connect, or, for some of you, it could be just taking a bath, or just taking a moment of one hand on the heart, one hand just cupping the vulva, and just bridging the heart and the womb together,
Yeah.
and just feeling into like, oh, let's just connect these two areas, and how does that feel in my body? And maybe you just need to take 5 minutes, or just a minute, or even 30 seconds, just to like bring
Mhm.
that connection, will do wonders. And I would recommend doing it in the morning when you get up and you're in bed. You could do it lying down, or if any time of the day where you feel disconnected, just taking a moment of one hand on the heart, one hand on the womb.
Thank you for that. Wow, so much wisdom. Thank you so much. Baljit, what else are you just feeling intuitively guided to bring forward in this now moment?
Yeah. Um, if this really uh sparked whoever is listening to this, I just feel like this is a sign for you to begin your journey and to start exploring and listening and your intuition in your body, and you don't have to force it. Also being slow and gentle as well. Especially if you have trauma, like working with someone who's trauma informed or trauma trained is really important. And and just having the awareness like will help shift things. So just it's important to not have judgment on yourself and to have
Yeah.
compassion. Because when we judge ourselves, then this is the thing where we tend to avoid or distract. And then we don't want to talk about it. And this is kind of like a dancing around subject. So if you notice you've been dancing around, it's like, okay, what am I dancing from? And just journaling about it. And it could just be with yourself. Like no one has to know, but for you to go deep within yourself and on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, getting in touch with our bodies and our sensual nature, it's very catalyzing, very transformational, and very magical to start connecting with yourself in that way.
It's pretty magical.
It is
Just,
pretty freaking magical.
yeah.
So, Baljit, for those who are feeling called to connect further with you, where is the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, you can reach me on my website at baljitrayat.com, and under my offerings, there's application for one-on-one work. There's also a link for my music if you want to listen to inspirational DJ sets as well. We can even book an Akashic record reading. So there's lots of stuff there, and also on my Instagram at I am Baljit Rayat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think you sent us some of those links, so we'll have a way for others to connect with you through the show notes as well. And wow, what an amazing conversation. So needed, right? Thank you so much for agreeing to come on as a guest. It's just such a blessing to know you and to be connected with you. And just thank you for all that you do.
Oh, my pleasure. You're most welcome. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Path of the Awakened Heart. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or pathoftheawakenedheart.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about living with an awakened heart and navigating your ascension journey, visit me at jenniferspore.com.